We're live.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our conversation today about navigating imposter syndrome. It is part of our Mental Health Awareness Month series at G2I, where every week we've set up a conversation and a topic surrounding mental health. And today we're going to be talking about navigating imposter syndrome with Mark Chandler. So I'll give it one more minute before we get started so we don't eat up too much time, and then we'll really dig into the meat and potatoes. And I'll just start by saying, welcome, Mark. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. I love meat and potatoes. Yeah, I'm doing great. I'm sitting on the side of a Starbucks in the middle of nowhere, Ohio, and it's a beautiful day. So doing good.
Nice. No place better to be for a Zoom call, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, perfect environment.
How are
Well,
you doing, Michelle?
Yeah, I'm doing good. I'm interviewing one of my very close friends about something that we talk about very often and that I think is really important and something that I think a lot of people can recognize and relate to. So, yeah, I think it's a good morning. Well, at least it's morning for me. I
Same.
think it's a quite a bit later for some of the other people joining. And if you are joining, go ahead and put in the chat where you're joining from, because I think we have quite a global remote group joining us for this call today. So don't be shy. Shout out where you're logging in from. I'm in Florida right now. Mark is in Ohio. Thea's in Denmark. Oregon. Nice. Oregon, it's early for you. Mexico, LA.
Nice.
Wow, we got some early birds. Montreal, welcome. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone, to our conversation on imposter syndrome today with Mark Chandler. My name is Michelle Bakels, and I'm Program Director of Developer Health at G2I. Since this event is open to people outside of G2I, I'll really quickly explain what we do and what I do at the company. So G2I is a platform for developers and for tech companies where developers can be connected to jobs and clients can hire top talent. So our developers are part of our developer community where we have a technical interview with them and we build applications together, and then we connect them to a role in the company of our clients and beyond that. So it's more than just contracting and recruiting and see you later. You really become part of our community, which is very well curated by Thea, and she puts on a lot of events, including this one today. Being program director of Developer Health is meant to support the physical and mental health of software developers. I am a software developer myself and have definitely gone through quite a journey with my health, my mental health in particular, which became so kind of stressful that it ended up having physical ramifications in the form of basically a stress-induced heart condition. And so at some point, I met the founder of G2I, and we had quite a lot of long conversations about wanting to really address developer health very seriously and in a concerted, intentional way that is solution-oriented. So beyond the kind of commiseration stage of burnout and stress and tech is hard, and more to like, okay, what can we do about it? So hopefully this conversation can be one of those events where we have some good takeaways and we have an honest, candid conversation about some of our struggles. So with that said, Mark Chandler is the guest today to talk about imposter syndrome. And I think somebody that is very well qualified in a sense to talk about it because his experience ranges from, starting off not in tech as an adult in a career, like not going into tech, switching into a career in tech, working for, a very large company, grocery company, to being a top contributor to an open source library called Shocker UI, which a lot of us are familiar with, to becoming one of the main proponents and shapers of a very popular DAO or community group called Developer DAO. So a lot of experience, a lot of kind of broaching the unknown. So welcome, Mark. Anything that you'd like to add to your introduction?
No, you nailed it. That was great. I will just say, for all the different experiences that I've had, I've been an adult for 16 years. I felt like an imposter the whole time. So if you feel that way, you're definitely not alone.
Yeah, yeah, it's something that it's like almost every new stage, you to kind of like revisit those feelings again, and which we'll definitely talk about. And I also want to say, like, Mark and I are going to have this kind of back and forth for a little bit of time in this all, but then afterwards we'll do an open Q&A. So, as we're talking, if you have any questions, write them down and we'll do a Q&A at the end. You're also welcome to add Q&A into the chat, and we can try and answer it throughout our conversation as well. So in any case, sorry I spoiled it a little bit, but can you start off with a little foundation of your journey into tech?
Yeah, sure. So right out of high school, I discovered depression right away. And I ended up dropping out of college. I had started in computer science. I went for just a couple months and dropped out, filled vending machines for a while, worked my way up to driving a truck delivering chips and pop and stuff like that around the city into coffee. And then, like, the whole way, I had always been kind of a script kiddie. Like, I loved writing code. I just thought you had to have a degree. So it felt impossible for me to actually become a developer. But I just randomly decided to go to my first meetup. My very first meetup, I met a guy that worked at Kroger, which is a very large grocery chain here in Cincinnati. And he looked at my GitHub and he was like, actually, your code is pretty good. Like, if we just practice a little bit, you could definitely be a dev. And that one little experience with him just giving me that tiny bit of confidence in myself changed the whole game for me. And yeah, so like everything since then has been wanting to do that for other people. Like, he gave me something just by saying a couple nice things and becoming my friend a little bit. He gave me a whole new life, and I want to do that for other people.
Yeah, that's amazing that you were able to have that person in your life. And so when you started at Kroger, I mean, I imagine your GitHub is kind of filled with like a few scripts, but now you have to build enterprise application. What was that transition like?
So it was kind of awful because it was like I had been doing Ruby, and eventually I got into React, like before I became a dev, and that's really what I focused on. But then when I got into enterprise, it was like everything's Java, and there's like a million teams because the scale was so huge. So it was very overwhelming. But I I did something that, looking back, was like very important for myself in being able to handle imposter syndrome for the rest of my career. And that was the very first week I became a dev at Kroger. I gave a talk to my team about Redux, which, like, I thought it was just going to be an overview, but then I had developers who'd been doing this for years come up to me afterwards and they're like, "You're really good at this. I learned X, Y, and Z from your talk." And it was just like a really impromptu talk. It wasn't anything that I planned very heavily. And so that that little win like has always just been in the back of my mind. Like your first week as a dev, you gave a talk and you taught people who'd been doing it for a long time. And so it's like I think back on that moment anytime I'm feeling doubt in myself. It's just like, hey, you remember that thing that you did your very first week?
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. And I actually talking about that feeling, that first initial feeling of imposter syndrome. I wanted to really briefly mention the kind of textbook definition of imposter syndrome, which is the condition of feeling anxious and not experiencing success internally despite being high performing in external and objective ways. And so it's kind of, to paraphrase or reword it, it's this feeling of like anxiety and fear that you're not doing well. In reality, from the outside, people are looking at you and they think that you are doing well. They think that you're performing at exactly the level that you should be performing at, but you're just not able to see it because you're kind of looking outside and you're seeing all the things that you don't know, and not really recognizing the things that you do know. And I think software is and computing is one of those fields where, I mean, like you can really carve out your niche and become an expert, and there's no one person who knows it all or even close to it all when you really start thinking about the vast ocean of knowledge in computing. So even if you don't have 10 years experience and you have these people very senior to you in your first job, there's that thing where it's like, "Oh, I know you guys don't know Redux?" Like, "Okay, well, I can share Redux with you." And it's like, you think it's like, "Oh, like everybody knows it because it's a super popular library for an insanely popular framework." But then here's your opportunity. How do
Yeah. And
you
it's go ahead.
I was gonna say, how do you kind of view the definition of imposter syndrome, and how do you relate to it? And is there anything that you add to it?
I think the definition makes a lot of sense. For me at least, it's like I think one important aspect of it is that it's not I don't think it's something that ever really goes away. Like it's pervasive, and I don't think it's just related to your job either. Like I feel it all the time with all the roles in my life. Like I'm not a good enough son, I'm not a good enough brother or friend because like, the reality is like there's always some truth to those kind of thoughts, right? Like you could always do more to be more of whatever it is that you're trying to be, but it kind of ignores the truth, which is like you're good enough wherever you are, right? Like you mentioned a little bit ago, like being a dev who doesn't have 10 years of experience, but the reality is like even when you're a dev who's had 10 years of experience, you're still going to have the same situation. Like you're going to look at people who have more experience than you or who are working on something else that you haven't worked on before, and you'll think, man, I'm nothing compared to those people. But it's not true. Like if you're new to development and you're spending time learning and doing tutorials or getting your GitHub set up for the first time, you're doing great, right? Like it's very relative, and so it's kind of like the trap of imposter syndrome is it's always there, it's always nagging at you, and it's always untrue, even if it doesn't feel like it.
Yeah, and I think, like, even when you're just starting out, setting up that GitHub repository, like, it's hard to put it into perspective, but you're already doing something that generally people don't do and they don't know how to do. And the fact that you even understand what GitHub is already requires some pretty, like, substantial amount of knowledge. Like, if you understand what GitHub is and you understand what the purpose is and the value of it, then there's all of these implications of what you understand, like version control. It's like keeping a code base that, people you can control access to it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think I think I agree with you. Is like kind of battling imposter syndrome requires some introspection and presence in the moment and appreciation for where you already are, and yeah, I think kind of like reframing that. And so you went into OSS on the side, like while you were working at Kroger. what are the differences between the experience? So you're working in enterprise and it's like you have the people that you work with looking at your code. You go into OSS and you have the world looking at your code, including a bunch of really smart developers that have been doing this stuff way longer than you. So what does that feel like, and how is that experience?
It's interesting to me because like even though with open source, way more people could look at your code, I I felt a lot less imposter syndrome because I think open source, at least like the spaces that I've been, tends to have this like welcoming attitude where it's like, as long as you're contributing, we're glad you're here, right? Like at least you're doing something because most people aren't contributing to open source. And so they want you to be there. Whereas your job is like, we're paying you. Why haven't you done this? Why haven't you met, these milestones? Why are things behind whatever, right? Like the expectations they're entirely different, which I've always found so interesting.
Yeah, so it's definitely like the culture and the attitude of the people around you too, feeling appreciated, which is huge, like it makes the difference between you feeling like you belong somewhere. Imposter syndrome definitely has ties to feelings of not belonging. And so feeling welcomed and included goes a really long way. And I think like even if you have a lot of experience, it's something that's good to know about people joining your team. How to help them be the best that they can be is kind of, you know, being kind and being a friend and making them feel like they belong where they are. So you mentioned, kind of recognizing in the present moment, like where exactly you are and how much you know and things like that, helping you with imposter syndrome. Are there other tools that you found can help you? Because I mean, you are very confident in exploring new things, not in the sense that you go into it feeling like you already know everything, but you go into it feeling like there's something there for you. So explain that kind of bravery or that mentality.
So I read this book a long time ago called Prometheus Rising, and it was written in the 70s by this guy named Robert Anton Wilson, who's kind of a crackpot. Like the book itself is not the point, but the idea of the book was like he was writing out a book that gave like a mental model for how you could think about your mind and how you could think about your relationships with others, things like that. Not super scientific, but the mental model was the important part. And the only part of the book that really stuck with me was the first chapter, which is called What the Thinker Thinks, the Prover Proves. And the idea is like he visualized the mind as being two pieces. You have the thinker, which is the thing that thinks thoughts and expresses ideas, and then the prover, which just exists to validate whatever it is that the thinker is thinking. So I've seen this so much in my own life where it's like if I am thinking bad things about myself, my mind will do everything it can to prove those bad things, right? And it will block out all the other information that disproves that or that shows otherwise. Um, but like it's such a powerful tool because the inverse is true. Like if you force yourself to think I'm good enough, or you force yourself to think about the things that you have accomplished, even if you don't feel like you've accomplished enough, your mind will then go and prove that you are good enough. It will find all the things that prove to you that actually you are good enough. And the more you do it, the more you're like building up this habit of thinking good things and then following it up with the proving part of your mind. And so it's like, I think it's the most important trick. It's like, even if I don't feel confident in doing something, if I force myself to just think like, you can do this, you can handle this, you can explore and find out new things, my mind will back me up on that. And I think that's true for a lot of people. It's all about like what kind of content are you putting in your mind, and you can like actively insert better things to get yourself to a better place.
I love that. I mean, I absolutely believe in constantly learning and growing, and experiencing new things, in order to become, somebody that can share a lot of knowledge and do good work. And that is, of course, a way to overcome imposter syndrome, is to kind of get to the level that you feel like you need to be at. Of course it is. but the human mind is so powerful, and there, like, these little tools, these little ways of examining it or thinking about your mind, um, to help you build that confidence, that I think that's so important. It's more than, okay, I'm going to learn redux tonight so that I can, feel like I belong or that I'm not an imposter. It's like, well, you can also like think about like all the things that you already know and overcome that feeling of imposter syndrome via that route as well. So I think both are pretty important. Obviously, you want to keep learning and doing things, but appreciate where you are. And so it's 10 minutes till the end of our conversation. So I didn't see any questions in the chat yet, but this is where we would do a Q&A. And I absolutely want to make sure that if there's any thoughts or questions that anybody's having, or even just a statement, something that you've gone through that you want to share and discuss a little bit, please feel welcome to share it in the chat. Oh, well,
There are a
also
couple of questions.
there is a separate section for Q&A I just saw, so there we go. Not sorry guys, not used to Crowdcast yet, but one person said maybe the issue is that we compare ourselves to others. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's really
Any thoughts?
about like where, like, comparing yourself to others is the wrong thing. It's about comparing yourself to who you were before, right? Like, I'm I've been so many different people in my life, changing careers and different things. So it's like, as long as I keep looking back at myself, I'm always making progress. I'm always learning new things. I'm always getting better. But the second I stop doing that and start thinking about like, oh, well, I'm not doing what this other person is doing, it's just so self-defeating. And there's no point, right? Like, what does comparing yourself to others do? It doesn't help you get a sense of direction. It doesn't make you feel good. It just makes you feel crappy.
Yeah. Yeah. Comparison is the thief of joy, right? That's a
Hmm.
famous phrase. Any thoughts on how we can support people who are going through imposter syndrome as colleagues and friends? Thea marked that done answering, I think, because we kind of touched on, helping people feel included and reaching out and checking in. But anything else we want to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's just gentle reminders that they are good enough, right? Like, even if it's just a pull review and they've written some code that you really like, just say that, right? Like, pull review doesn't have to be all business. You can tell people, hey, I like how you did this. I appreciate that you did this way. Tell them that you learned something from them. That's like one of my favorite things is when somebody says, hey, I read this bit of code that you wrote. I didn't even know that you could do that. That it makes me feel so good about myself, even though it's just doing what I do all the time anyway, which is write code, right?
Yeah, I love that. I think when we think about pull reviews or pull requests, the immediate like standard behavior is to only mention things that aren't good or that we disagree with or that we don't understand. And there's never usually any commentary that's like, this is really great. I'm gonna approve it. And I really like how you did that. Like it's always like, if there's no comments, then it's fine. Otherwise, here's all the negative things. So I like that, taking opportunities to share kind words, positivity. So for any positive, this is an interesting, for any positive aspects related to imposter syndrome, what might those be and how can they best be leveraged?
Well, as a lifelong imposter syndrome sufferer, like, it's given me the experience to be able to be on this talk, right? Like, if you've struggled with something and gotten through to the other side, you have experience now that you can share with other people to help them feel better and help them get through their struggles. So I don't know that I'd say there's positive aspects, right? But like, I guess there is that positive thing to it. If you've struggled with it, you now have something that you can share too.
Yeah, the kind of, yeah, maybe not necessarily like this is outright positive, but like maybe silver lining to an experience is what you can share afterwards. More empathy, understanding, and then a familiarity with it. I mean, I talk about this a lot with burnout too. Most people burn out because they don't recognize the signs of burnout until they've already burnt out. And then sometimes people have to go through it like 2 or 3 times to be like, oh, like it's about to happen again. Like I can feel it, like, you know? And so, yeah, sometimes when you go through it over and over and it's not like it's never going to happen again, but you can start to recognize the signs and you can, you can get ahead of it before it can have pretty detrimental effects. So, what are some strategies for using life and career excesses outside of the software world into it, especially when a code roadblock sends you into a negative spiral?
That's a really good question. I am very much not a strategies person for the most part. Like I'm spontaneous to like an extreme for the most part. But I think like everything is interconnected, right? Where it's like, maybe you're not the best dev right now, but also you're caring for your elderly neighbor, right? Or like you are being there for a friend who's going through a rough time. Like those things are not separate buckets, right? Like you as a dev is not some totally separate person from you as an individual. So it's like even if you're not doing great at work, you can still back yourself up with thoughts about what you're doing in your personal life. Like who gives a shit about work? I'm doing something very important for someone else. I'm helping somebody else. I've been there for people who needed me, right? Like I don't know. I don't know where to go with that, but I think acknowledging your successes, no matter what it is very important, and you shouldn't keep things separate. Like that just hurts you in the long run.
Yeah, I think there is no like leaving things outside of work. Like we just have this one human mind. This might sound a little bit dark and like I'm in a constant existential crisis, but I I I find it reassuring personally, strong opinion warning, um, that none of us asked to be born and we're all trying to find our way and figure out how to create meaning. And basically all meaning is an invention, and we basically have to make a choice every day, how we want our lives to play out, and what kind of meaning we want to give it. And so, sometimes when I'm feeling really stressed out about technology, I think like these are just ones and zeros, and everything that comes from it is us just like as humanity, like a collective, trying to give purpose to our species and to life. And at the end of the day, like there are people who my survival depends on and they don't work in technology. Like these are people in my community, this is my family, and nourishing that and taking care of that can become just as meaningful in life as your job and technology. You kind of control the balance, you decide where the meaning lies, and I think you can be even more excited at some point for the successes in your life, to the point where you feel less stressed about imposter syndrome in tech because it feels less burdensome. Sorry if that took a bit of a dark turn, but that's just personally how I kind of think about things.
I loved it.
And yeah. And then, are you still feeling imposter syndrome these days, Mark?
Every single day. Every single day. Yeah, it's always there. Some days are better than others, but there's always those nagging doubts of like, am I doing the right thing? Have I written enough code? Am I supposed to be reviewing something that somebody wanted me to look at and I haven't? There's just like an infinite list of things, but the difference is like having dealt with it long enough, I have enough tools in my head that I I don't have to accept it as truth, right? Like it can nag me all at once. I know it's not true. I know that I'm capable as a developer. I know that I'm capable as a human being, and I can handle all these doubts. That's fine. Bring
Yeah.
it on, brain.
Yeah, I think that's such a good perspective to like not see things as like distinctly time boxed emotions of like, oh, in August I felt imposter syndrome and then in September I didn't. And it's like, okay, there are multiple things that can exist like at the same time, and ways of understanding kind of a multitude of emotional feelings happening simultaneously. That was a tough sentence to say. But yeah, and maybe we put a lot of we put pressure a lot on ourselves, which we do. We absolutely do. So it is the top of the hour. So I want to be cognizant of our time together having come to an end. So I will say thank you everyone for joining us for this conversation. Thank you, Mark, for being very open and honest about your thoughts and your experience. And if you want to stay connected with us, we're at G2I_co on Twitter, CO on Twitter. And you're all connected with Thea now, so be sure to reach out to her. Thank you so much, everyone. And I hope this helped. And feel free to let us know also online if you got anything out of this.
Yeah, thanks for coming, everybody. This was a good time. And if you're feeling like an imposter, it's okay.